This is Katie Lund, and I'm interviewing Jean Stoll-Lang at her home at Mountain View Apartments on January 14th, 1997. Got to get the date, don't we? Okay, Jean, let's start by talking about where you were born and who your parents were.
My parents were Emma M. Oversteg, who was a native of the East River Valley, close to Crested Butte. She was the second generation of her family. Her parents were descended from New York, and their parents came directly from Switzerland. They first settled on what is known as the Acre Ranch.
Right.
And my grandfather homesteaded that, and then it was sold to the Ponias, and they in turn disposed of it to the Acres. And my mother grew up there and worked in Crested Butte, and they were quite a large family.
Now, was Robert Oversteg her brother?
He was my mother's brother.
Okay, all right.
And there were several of the boys. He was the only one that remained in the county. And there were 5 girls, one of whom other than my sister was Mrs. Olive Spann. And they all remained in Gunnison County.
Oh, okay. And your father was?
My father was a mining man that was sent, quote, out west by the Bethlehem Steel Company to install mining machinery.
What year was that?
I don't know, but I would say it was probably around 1900.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would make sense.
And he met my mother in Crested Butte, and that's where they were married. And they lived there for a while. My father installed a lot of the machinery in Crested Butte. And he also installed a lot of machinery close to Denver and supervised it. And then he was sent to install machinery and survey the mine at what is known or was known as Old Baldwin, which in those days they called Kubler, K-U-B-L-E-R.
And where was that exactly?
Going north on the Baldwin Road, you turn off to the right before you get to the Castleton Ranch. And there was a large mountain there, which they called Mount Carbon. And they even had a post office there for a while. And there used to be among my parents' memorabilia some letters and mail, even with the Mount Carbon postmark on, which was very interesting.
Yeah, right. How many people lived there?
In Old Baldwin, I really am not sure, but I suppose in its days of boom, there probably would have been a couple hundred. And then the coal more or less ran out, and they went to what was called New Baldwin, or just plain Baldwin. And it was quite a little settlement.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? For a long time.
Yes. I don't know how long. It was past World War II that Mr. L.D. Hardin was still running the mine there.
Yeah, and taking coal out and everything.
Oh, yes, and they had a company store. Which carried everything. It was just amazing when you think about it.
Well, it was a long way by train. What was it?
Yes.
A day practically to get to Gunnison, or 4 hours?
A good 4 hours. The train didn't come up every day, but it came about 3 times a week. And it would come up, and it was always so much fun to hear the train whistle. And one of the engineers was a friend of my parents, and my mother would always leave a jar of whipping cream and a pound of butter or something. His name was Charles Cowan, and he would often grab the cream and the butter, and then we'd hear him whistle, and he'd blow the train whistle. No, we got it, and thank you.
Oh, neat. So, when were you born?
I was born in 1921.
And where were you born?
I was born right here in Gunnison. My folks, of course, were ranchers towards the Baldwin Way, but I was born here in Gunnison.
And where did you spend your early years?
Most of them were spent on on our father's ranch in Baldwin.
In Baldwin, okay. And where is that ranch exactly?
Where Dr. Jones is now.
Oh, okay.
And it joined the LaPlante Ranch, which was just north of us. And as I say, my father and Mr. LaPlante were almost like brothers. And they even took out a large portion of the fence between our ranches, and they ran cattle together.
Right. So how far were you from what we know of as Baldwin today?
About 4 to 5 miles.
Oh, okay, north.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. So
And then I rode my horse to school, to the Castleton School, which no longer exists.
Was that for Baldwin?
No,
Castleton?
Baldwin had its own school.
Oh, okay.
At one time, there was 31 school districts in Gunnison County.
I've seen a picture, well, we were talking about Lizzie Fardell. I saw her school picture when she was like in 5th or 6th grade, and there must have been 60 kids in that school with the teacher.
Yes. Well, I attended the Castleton School. I rode every day horseback, and sometimes it was 40 below. And at one point, we had 42 students and 1 teacher.
Wow.
And we had all 8 grades.
Wow.
And our teacher was excellent. And when I came down here to go to school full time, I went a few weeks of the year down here. I was supposed to have been in 3rd grade, and I was ahead of the kids here. And I didn't know it. I was left in 3rd grade 2 weeks, and they put me in 4th grade.
Oh.
So when my children make comments to me now or something, and my oldest daughter is in the educational system, I just look at her and laugh and say, well, I think it's pretty good for a kid that didn't even get out of 3rd grade.
Did you go to high school in Gunnison, too?
Yes, I did.
But your parents had moved here, or you?
Yes, when we left the ranch, we moved.
Okay.
We moved into the big stone house, the Alonzo Hartman house.
Oh.
And we were there for more than 20 years.
Oh, how nice.
And my father wanted that because he said at that time it was the last house north of Gunnison. And he said, I can always look up the Ohio Creek Way and survey the mountains, and he wanted that.
Now, when you went to school in Castleton, did you go September through June, or did they go
we
April
went
through
straight,
October?
you
went all year.
Through September to June.
Okay, and what about winter?
It was not bad. You were prepared for it. And there was not any school district buses. Of course, there was not any such thing as buses.
Right.
And the OC mine, which is the Staples mine, known as, was in full operation at that time, and there was 26 kids came from the OC mine.
Wow.
And some of the Staples family, I can't remember which one, I think an older brother, ran more or less a animal bus. In the winter, it was a sled, and in the summer, it was a wagon, and they brought 25 or 26 children down from the OC mine.
Wow. Yes, we complain about walking 2 blocks, right?
Well, of course, when you had snow up to your neck there, you couldn't very well walk far.
No, of course you couldn't, but your horse could make it for you.
Oh, yes, he was a marvelous horse, and if there was a bad storm, you couldn't see sometimes about in February or March. And of course we were always taught, as our local horses are, they know the way home. And my father used to say, if you don't know where you're going, just tie your reins up and swat Tony and tell him to come home and he'll find the way. And this was it.
Were you an only child, or did you have sisters?
No, I have an older brother who was one of the first students at Western State College when it was titled Colorado State Normal School.
Right.
And he attended that, as did many of my local relatives. And then my sister is Frances Kelly.
Yes, of course, I have a sister. We've just talked about it. Okay, so you were in the middle?
I'm the youngest.
Oh, you're the youngest. Okay. So did your sister go to school at the same time you did, or?
She was considerably ahead of me, and my brother, of course, was in college. My mother practically raised 3 different families with our age span.
Yeah. Well, I figured if he was one of the first students, and the school started in 1912.
He's been deceased quite some time.
Yeah. But that's really something. Tell me some of your earliest memories of the ranch.
Probably starting with the fall, about Thanksgiving, people started getting ready for the holidays, and we would perhaps get to town with our car early in December, and then our car was put away until about Easter, because there were no more car trips, and we were snowed in. And Mr. Joe Zillinger was our mail carrier, and my mother, any groceries that you needed, you bought groceries by, quote, the ton, But any little things she needed, she would call the town, and Mr. Zillinger would bring them on the stage. From Jorgensen's Market or the Gunnison Mercantile. The Safeway was not even open at that time.
Right. The Safeway didn't open until about the Depression, did it?
I don't believe so. As of course, I couldn't really remember. And then, of course, there were several smaller grocery stores in the area too, like Ball's Grocery down close, catty corner from the old Avita. The huge house there, I think they call it our store. That was Ball's grocery store, and it was a darling little country store. You had everything in the world there.
Yeah. So what else?
Later in the fall, people got out their cutter, which children think of as an exemplification of a Santa Claus sleigh. And it really is not a sleigh at all. It is formally known as a cutter. And you've seen them. The shape is very accurate. There is one on display at the Pioneer Museum. And there also is a very lovely one which is on display at times in the Bookworm. And one of the most beautifully restored and authentic ones I've ever seen is at the Moncrief Lodge in Lake City. It is gorgeous.
And you used how many horses to pull that?
Usually ours here were pulled by 2 horses or even 1. But the idea was taken from a Russian design, and there they used 3 horses abreast. But if we used more than 2, you used 4. But usually 2, and if it was very small, it was pulled by 1. And some of them could be very, very ornate. They had beautiful filigreed brass decorations, and they would have doors that would open. And our neighbors had a 2-seater, which was very unusual. And for Christmas and New Year's, they would put lanterns on the sides and bells on the horses. And of course, none of the horses liked the bells.
I bet they didn't.
But that was always so much fun to prepare the cutter.
And you'd use the cutter to get around in the winter. If you had to go to, suppose you got sick and had to go to town, would you?
You would come down as far as you could on that, and then usually somebody would send out a sleigh or with like a covered wagon to meet you. And then, of course, you could, if it was a matter of real dire emergency, flag down the train, and they would bring you in the caboose. There was not a passenger car that ever went to Crested Butte, or perhaps it did to Crested Butte and never did to Baldwin.
But you could ride in the caboose. And people did ride. If
Yes.
they had a toothache or something.
All the ranchers or emergencies, they let you ride in the caboose.
I didn't realize that. I thought people took the train, but it was only emergency to take the train.
And if you had to go to the hospital, you had to go by train over Marshall Pass, because the closest hospitals were Montrose and Salida.
Of course. Oh my goodness.
And Salida ran a very fine hospital. It was sponsored by the railroad, and at that time it was known as the DNRG Hospital.
Well, that was at least you had a hospital
in
a day.
And excellent doctors.
That's good.
A couple of the doctors were very dear friends of my father's, and they would come over and go hunting and fishing and stay with us.
Well, then what did you do?
I went to school to Castleton until 5th grade, and then my parents moved to town because my parents were not young even at that time.
Of course not.
And then I finished school here in Gunnison and went through grade school and high school and to Western for a while.
So what was life like when you moved to Gunnison?
Very nice and quiet, and I used to make lemonade and have dog pee parties and drink soft drinks out of water I scooped up out of the ditch. It was perfectly all right.
I know. How many kids in this world have drank ditch water?
Oh, yes, yes.
I know. It's so funny, isn't it?
Yes, and of course it was very frequent you saw a small fish. I don't know if he was a sucker or a trout coming down the ditch swimming freely.
Sure. And what was school like in Gunnison compared to what it had been like in Castleton?
It was easier for me. It really was. We had a fabulous teacher. And of course, your school hours were devoted to your school instruction, which I think we have lost the ball on that game because there's too many things that interfere with the school structure and the studying. And when we have to take time out for so many things, we're missing a lot of the instruction. And I think children don't realize the fun that there are in games anymore. Very few games are played. I mean, sitting down at a computer is fine, but that is not the personal reaction.
What kind of games did you used to play?
We had a game called Red Rover, Pum Pum Pull Away,
Run, sheep, run.
Kick the Can, Run, Sheep, Run, Hide and Seek, all that sort of thing.
And the thing I remember, because I grew up in the city, but the thing I remember was there were all age groups.
Yes.
From like 12 to 6 or something.
We had first grade. We did not have kindergarten in our country school. In fact, I went to kindergarten down here, lots. Just my mother wanted me to go. And it was really funny because I went to kindergarten in the basement of Western State College at Taylor Hall. That's where our kindergarten was.
Who taught? Do you remember who taught?
No, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Was it part of the public school or part of Western?
So. No, I think it was part of the public school.
Oh, okay.
And my sister also went to kindergarten, I think, there, and I don't think my brother went to kindergarten. I don't remember.
They may not have had it.
I doubt that they did.
Yeah, he went to Western so
Yes.
early. Yeah. So, at the school, would you eat your lunch at the school, bring your little sack
everybody
lunch?
took their own lunch. And we took our horses' lunch. I would have a gunny sack. I don't know whether they even have gunny sacks in existence then. My father always had lots of gunny sacks because we got grain and feed and meal and food for the animals in them. I took a gunny sack full of hay every day and a can of oats for my horses' lunch. And the ranchers went together and donated time and labor and materials and made a nice horse shed. I mean, you needed protection for those animals.
Right.
And at noon, all of us had to go feed and water our horses.
That's neat. And then you get to eat, right?
Oh, yes. And we always took our lunch, and during the winter, often my mother would fix me soup in the thermos, hot soup, and that was very good.
Yeah, and you probably did you have a wood stove in the school?
Oh, we had a gigantic wood, it was more than wood, it was coal also.
Of course.
And it was huge, it was as big as a dining room table. The only one comparable in size, and I have no idea whatever happened to it, there was one in the Jorgensen grocery store, and it was as big as a dining room table, and that was exactly the same stove that we had in our country school.
Okay, so you were plenty warm.
And the teacher, of course, she got there about 7:30 in the mornings, and she always had to start the stove and get the fire going, and a lot of the kids were on duty to empty the ashes or bring in the coal and wash the blackboards and a lot of those things. And oddly enough, when you were a kid, you looked forward to those extra duties. Gee, I get to wash the blackboards or take out the ashes.
Yeah, can I please erase the blackboard today, please? Yeah, I remember that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, when you moved to Gunnison, did you miss the ranch and the school?
Very much. Very much. Mainly my horse.
Oh, yeah,
my dog came along, but not the horse.
See, that's sad, isn't it? Yeah.
But there were beautiful things on the ranch which I'll never, ever forget.
Such as?
And one thing, on the big hill, the highway did not go as it is now constructed from our ranch to Baldwin. It was very close to a lovely hillside which faced west. And in the early morning, before the sun was very bright, it would be loaded with beautiful wild primroses. They were the type which were very close to the ground and very fragrant, and they were white edged with a very light pink edging, or they'd be very, very pale pink. And they gave forth such a marvelous scent, which I would say was comparable to a mixture of gardenia and roses.
Wow.
And they were gorgeous.
Yeah, and I haven't seen so many primroses in the
I
valley.
think perhaps with all the construction, and of course when they changed the road, they completely dug up that side of the hill on which they grew. And then, of course, you have the yellow primrose, which is more of a stalky one, but it doesn't have a scent. But these, the little petals were beaded with dew, and they were just lovely. And then, of course, on the magnificent hills and the turquoise-tipped fir, it was beautiful, and the lush raspberries and gooseberries grew very abundantly. And my mother was a great raspberry and gooseberry fan, and we had a lot of bushes on our ranch close to the hills. Our upper hill was very, very close to the castles. In fact, that was the main way then to go to the castles. You had to go through our ranch. And my dad said, okay, to get there. But one day my mother was out berry picking, and a very huge bear was within just a few feet of her. That kind of stunned her, but it didn't bother her. And she had one of our horses, and of course our horses were all trained that so it's a bear. They didn't pay attention. And she was a pretty good shot with some guns, not always. My father was an excellent shot and marksman. But he gave her a .45, and I remember this so well. He said, now if you see that bear, shoot him. And she said, I could never shoot a bear, and I couldn't lift the gun anyway. And he said, well, then when he gets that close, just take the handle and whack him between the eyes and then knock him out.
I bet you had a lot of bears up there.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
In fact, we had almost everything. We had bear, we had mountain lion, something I can't remember my father saying that we had, but it seems to me that they would be reminiscent of that area was mountain sheep. But there were bear and mountain lion and elk and deer and lots of coyotes and even a few wolves. In fact, Mr. LaPlante, I think, killed one of the few remaining wolves in the area at that time. And there were a few of those nasty things called wolverines.
Oh, really?
And they're very, very bad.
Yeah, they are really nasty, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. Oh, and your parents have a cattle ranch?
Yes.
Yeah.
Herefords.
Yeah. Did they have problems with the predators, or?
We didn't ever lose anything by a predator, anything, with the exception of a few chickens. The reason we lost them, they would get out of the chicken pen, and the coyotes got them. We never were bothered by bears or wolves or mountain lions or anything.
Or even coyotes.
Well, the coyotes would get the chickens if they were out, but that was it.
Of course, there were probably enough. There were probably enough prey for the predators that they didn't have to go after cattle or dogs or whatever. Yeah, that's interesting.
And the snow got very deep. It often was up over the fourth wire of the fence. And if that were so by late February and March, it was fun. But people weren't very happy about it because some of the smaller animals could walk on the crust. But you could go sledding or anything and just go over the top of the fence. And it was lots of fun.
Yeah, so the kids like that. Yeah. Well, were winters tougher in those days?
I think they were, but you were prepared for them.
How were you prepared?
You knew if you got out in that weather it was going to be cold and deep, and you were well dressed, and you didn't expect it to be a sunny, balmy day if you were out in the middle of January and February. And you took care of your animals because you knew that was going to be the story too. So you knew after the 1st of January, winter was there until at least after St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, at least, if you were lucky. After St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, I didn't come till 72, but I did the census in 80, and in Crested Butte on April 1st, the snow was still up to the second-story window, so in a bad year.
Oh, yes. Your ground level windows, you might as well have forgotten in the old days in Crested Butte because the snow covered them. You couldn't see out of them.
Yeah. So it seemed like winters were colder even when I first came here than they are now.
I think perhaps they were, but I don't know. I think our storms and our weather is progressing more serious at a rate of which we're unaware. And I have been told by people who should know that with the expansion of the ozone layer and the destruction of all of our forests, which I think is just so sad, that our weather is going to become worse and worse and worse. And then this also is an indication it's going to be much hotter in the summers. So I think it's something we should start taking care of.
Yeah. Well, when you were living in Gunnison, it was during the Depression.
Yes.
How hard was it living in Gunnison during the Depression?
Of course, we always had a good living, but I know it was very difficult. I don't really think too many of our local people were affected. But many times, people, complete strangers, of course, would knock at our door and ask my mother and father if there was some work they could do for some food. And sometimes the lawn was mowed or wood was cut, but my mother always gave them something to eat.
I have, other people I've talked to about the Depression have said that, especially ranchers, that there was always enough to eat.
That's it.
But there wasn't anything else.
Well, of course, the food that was consumed, I can't imagine, since I'm an adult, the food that was consumed on our ranch. And everything was bought by the case and by, I suppose, just quantities of wholesale lots. Because, number one, you had to have the food. Number two, you had to be prepared for weather conditions. And, of course, we had our own meat and butter and cheese and cream and eggs and all that sort of thing. And our dog, I mentioned our dog. She was a collie and she was a darling. Her name was Trixie Ann. And all of our animals, my sister said they were spoiled rotten, but then they were all affection trained, and my father would just simply talk to them and everything was done. And our dog lived to be 16 years old. And she wouldn't have even known there was such a thing on the market as dog food. And my mother would give her, she probably had at least 2 eggs a week. My mother cooked her eggs. She had a pancake maybe a couple of times a week. She had all the meat she wanted. She didn't like milk. She didn't drink milk. But she loved whipped cream and ice cream. And she had all she wanted of that, and she was very healthy.
Well, I hear you can feed a dog if you feed him right on people food.
She never had anything else.
And it leaves 16 now. You can't eat 16.
No.
Do you remember a particularly bad winter? I was going to ask you that.
Not really. Only, I'm going to make a guess that it was probably about 1929. And there was a particular doll. It was at the building which was formerly Blackstock's drugstore, and it was run by some people by the name of Millers. And they had a lovely drugstore and things, sundries. And in that store was the most beautiful doll I ever saw in my life. Well, I was bribed, of course, saying, well, Santa Claus might bring you that doll if you're real good. And boy, I did everything under the sun to be good, things that haven't even been invented yet. But anyway, Christmas morning, and I had a lovely Christmas, but there was a note from Santa Claus saying that I was getting a doll, but that she might freeze, so she couldn't get there. He couldn't bring her until the weather warmed up. And that was because even Mr. Zillinger couldn't get through on the stage for a couple of days. And I remember that he was late bringing my doll. And I think that was about 1929. I'm not sure.
So that must have been a rough year.
It was very bad. But as I said, everybody was prepared for it, so it didn't make any difference.
Plus you didn't expect to have to drive to Denver.
No. People did, as now, and I can understand that. My mother and dad used to say, oh, the weather will be bad because it's stock show. Well, that is typical. And when people went to the stock show, the trip was so bad by car. Most people did go by train. And of
Yeah.
course, we had a good passenger train
Yeah.
out from here to Salida
Right.
and then on to Denver.
Yeah. Do you remember going to the stock show? Did you ever go?
Yes, a couple of times.
Uh-huh. Was it a big event?
Oh my, yes. Oh yes.
Wow.
Gee, yes. And of course, it didn't compare with anything that there is now in the line of stock show, but it was lovely. And everybody went that wanted to put up with the weather, because I can remember several ranchers saying, well, I want to go, but the weather will be worse than it is here, so I'm not going.
And what did you think of Denver?
I liked Denver. I lived there when I was first married for several years. And of course, I felt I knew Denver pretty well then, but I don't know it at all now. I mean, I can't tell it's the same place hardly.
Can you tell the Gunnison Valley is the same place?
Not at all. Not at all.
What kind of changes have you seen?
I think we're getting so-called urban sprawl, and it bothers me immensely that we're ending the reign of many of our beautiful, wonderful, productive ranches. I can see it. Many of the younger generation do not want to ranch. And the older people get too old, and it's too much work, and it's hard and difficult, so they sell to subdivisions. And subdivisions are fine, but there should be a consideration of more than what's going to be on the surface. I mean, we can't supply water and all the necessary municipalities to homes and extensive property that's coming up like mushrooms.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I go to Crested Butte every 6 weeks to get my hair cut. And it's like every 6 weeks there's something added. And I can remember when we first came here in '72, you'd drive to Crested Butte, there was...
That's right. That's right.
It was just those beautiful...
That is right.
Meadows and mountains.
Yes, yes. And, I mean, we should realize the fact that we're draining Mother Earth much more rapidly, and it will never be replaced. And when it's gone, it's gone.
It's hard. I don't know, it's the ranches that gave us our open space.
That's right. That is right.
Because they keep... And there's something neat about seeing cattle in the field.
I love all animals, but to me, cattle and horses are it.
Yeah, and it's a little different to see houses in the field.
Very different.
When did you first leave the valley?
About 1935 or 36.
And that was after you'd gone to college here?
No, that was when I was smaller, when we left the ranch.
Okay. Oh, I meant Gunnison.
When did I leave the Gunnison family? About 1948.
Oh, okay. So that was after college?
Yes.
Yes. What did you study at the college?
Mainly history, English, and science.
Okay. And were you going to teach, or were you going to...
No, originally I planned to go into nursing. But I got out just at the time of World War II. And my sister was gone because her husband was in the service, Forrest Kelly. And my brother was gone, and my parents were quite elderly, so I stayed here and worked.
And what did you do?
Well, I worked... I was the first woman checker in Gunnison County. I went to work as a checker in the Safeway store, which was located in the building where lawyers in the lawyer building. That was where the Safeway store was at that time.
Oh, that's right. Well, World War II did change women's status, didn't it? Went back for a while, but it never could really go back, I think. Once you know that women can check and be riveters and do all these things. So you left about 1948?
Yes.
And you went to Denver? Is that where you went?
Well, I went to Denver for a while, yes. And I was married then, and then I went to Los Alamos, New Mexico, and I worked at the atomic installation for 5 years.
Oh, that must have been interesting.
And then we moved back to Denver, and then I went to Salt Lake, and then I went to Southern California, and then I went to Los Angeles, and then I went to Northern California.
So how did growing up in the Gunnison country prepare you for leaving the Gunnison country?
It didn't prepare me at all, and I was very reluctant to leave because I couldn't see swapping city life for the beautiful country life I'd grown up in.
Mm-hmm. But you obviously adjusted.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Were there things you liked about leaving the Gunnison Valley?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to see a commercial opera or a play or anything, I mean, all you had to do was think about going to Denver, and that was much easier than getting downtown in LA or San Francisco.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it had everything there was to offer, and at that time it had none of the disagreeable things.
Which are?
The absolute rudeness and disregard for citizens or people or humanity of many of, I wouldn't say it was the street people, but people who are foreign to our element. I mean, people come up that can't hardly speak English and say, "I want change," or "Give me change." And if you say, "I don't have any," and start to go on when they spit upon you. And
but this wasn't in Gunnison.
Oh, no. This is California.
Right. But in Gunnison, has Gunnison become more disagreeable now than when you were growing up?
I can't tell it that much. Of course, I am of the older generation. However, I can see that things are much more congested. And I think there's much more disregard all over our world for people as individuals. Like, if you want to know some questions and ask anyone by telephone, locally or out of the area, our computer's down. There's never an issuance that, "Well, I'm sorry, we're unable to give you that information at this time, but I will look it up and get back to you." None of that. I haven't got it now, so too bad.
Yeah, there is a kind of, I think that's true, there is a rudeness in
Absolutely.
our world. You see it, well, I walk everywhere, and there is a lot of congestion. We have our little traffic jams in the morning at 8 o'clock or 7:30 to 8, there's all this. And people disregard, when they're in cars, they disregard pedestrians. It's really terrible.
I get so irritated, I think someday I'm going to the police department and say, "I'm going to make some citizens arrests." The disregard and the absolute hazard that is portrayed by many of these young drivers is just terrible. And I think it is the idea, "Oh, I'm here to go to college and I don't care. The laws are made for everybody else but me."
I know. You see people speeding through town. You think,
I know.
You know, or someone will stop for you when you're going to cross when I'm going to cross Main Street, someone will stop and someone else will pull out behind them.
Yes,
come around.
This is one of the things that is so hazardous.
What if I were a little kid and just ran right across?
I know.
You know? I'm an adult, I expect that.
Yeah, that's it. We expect it.
Yeah. I can prepare. I know, but I really think, that's what I was telling my husband, when you walk in this town, the biggest danger is you're going to get run over.
Anything. You know, the same old modified scout issue. Be prepared, hope for the best, and expect the worst.
Yes.
So.
Now, you have a little note card there of notes.
Well, this was in reference to Old Kubler and the New Baldwin.
Oh, okay.
And that was about what I could say about it. As I say, it was Old Kubler.
I wanted to make sure
and that was Old Baldwin referred to.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure. When did you return to Gunnison?
In the fall of 1990.
Okay, why did you return?
My children were both adults and out on their own and had been for several years. And I had worked at my same job for 26 years.
Where were you working?
I was working in the medical dental building, the Eagle Rock Medical Dental Building, 14 miles. It's a clinic north of San Francisco.
Oh.
And I had worked for...
In what town were you? North?
I was closest to a little town called Tiburon.
Oh, I know where that is. I grew up in the area.
Did you?
My parents still live there. Yeah, in El Cerrito.
Oh.
Yeah, so you were in Marin County.
Yes,
yeah.
I was.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you really lived in the big metro area.
Yes, yeah. I was fortunate that I was I lived in Mill Valley proper. But and my daughter, the one daughter, is still there.
Yeah. Mill Valley is still beautiful, even though it's grown so much.
Yeah, it's very, very congested anymore too. But they are very strict about their zoning and business and residential regime, and it is still the very picturesque place it always was.
I guess, because I was born during World War II, but I guess the Bay Area just mushroomed during World War II when the shipyards
unfortunately, a lot of your areas, your suburb areas, Oakland still has a lot of things you wouldn't want to really endorse. And there are some areas it's been good and bad. But one of the biggest hazards, there's no other way I can say it, when you have an influx of 1,800 people a week that aren't even screened, I mean, I'm going to guess and say at least half of them are illegal aliens. And that is something that they just seem to let slide by. And it is a big, big problem.
So why did you decide to come back? Your kids were grown and you were going to retire?
This was my home and where my heart was, and I couldn't wait to get back.
And your sister was still here?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because she and her husband...
She and my nieces, and then I have many cousins in the area. And, of course, I know practically every inch of the county.
Now, when you first came back, was it a shock to you?
No, I had come back on visits to my sister and my other relatives frequently. So, but it did change a great deal. And one of the biggest changes, and I can say, oh, it's just wonderful, I think Western State College is just marvelous, and they have a beautiful campus. And
was it not beautiful when you went there?
It was beautiful, but it wasn't nearly as large. Not nearly. We had a couple of small men's dormitories, and I think we only had one woman's dormitory, and we only had one athletic building, and it really, was...
What years were you at Western?
I was there from 40 through 40, 41, 42.
Okay, yeah, I guess it really started booming after the war.
Yes.
Under, I can't remember the name of the president who came after the war, but Marty Hatcher said he just did so much to boom, you know. There was so much
Mr.
building.
Dodson was president when I went to school there.
Yeah, and the war years were hard years.
Oh, yes, very definitely. Very definitely.
Do you remember some of the effects that World War II had on Gunnison as a town?
Yes. If your car broke down, I mean, all our mechanics, a lot of them, of course, were young men. That was just like you'd blow them out a horn. Maybe there's one or two older gentlemen. Well, I can do it, and I mean older gentlemen. It'll take a while, and I'm not very fast, and then if I can get the parts. And this, and like silk hosiery, well, you were lucky if you had it, and I remember if you, quote, dressed up and went out, if you went to the show, you'd sit in the car and take your stockings off so they wouldn't get snagged on the seats in the theater, because there weren't any stockings on the market. They were all sent overseas or to the PXs, or the material that went into them had to go into other things like tires.
So you had to sew your stockings.
Yes.
It's amazing. And there probably weren't very many men around, period, right?
No, either very young or very old. I mean, all your middle group, they were gone. And everybody did things that you didn't think you could do.
Yeah, I guess that's
You managed. Maybe you weren't the top of the lot, but you got the job done.
Well, what else would you like to tell me about your years in Gunnison that I've forgotten to ask you?
I think that we should try and retain our situation as is as much as we can.
How do you think we can do that?
We have got to be very, very vigilant about prospective businesses, zoning laws, water laws. We should, I think, be very much more strict than we are about the removal of our timberland, particularly our timber. It doesn't grow in 15 minutes. And what has made this country beautiful and productive, and our wildlife are beginning to take a horrible beating. I mean, we're driving the poor wildlife out, and I think there are places which should be reserved strictly for them. I don't think men should be allowed in at all on snowmobiles, skis, anything else. I mean, where can they go for a rest and a little reprieve from man? And this is showing up, and it's going to show up. And I think we should be very strict about that and take more precautions than we are taking.
Let me turn that over. Just turn this on for a second. Oh, I can't say I'm trying to breathe through more.
Are we on inactive? We are in inactive state now.
Yeah.
I want to tell you something, Kathy, that I am going to go to a meeting as such when it occurs. I'm trying to keep track of it. I don't know whether you're aware that there is the request in front of the, I don't know, now I'm not sure about this, if it's the Planning Commission or the County Commissioners.
Well, usually it goes to the Planning Commission
for the gravel pit north of town, and I'm going to take my 45 and my bullwhip book.
Are you sure I can't put this on?
This is under the table. The present owner apparently, now I'm not sure this is exactly right. This is hearsay and mumbo jumbo.
Right.
But I do know the present owner had been issued a permit for 35 trucks a day load. Well, to me, that's plenty. That's 35 out. That's 35 north.
Yeah.
That's our only road out going north.
Right.
He is requesting up to 110 a day. No, ma'am. And this would be 220. How can we have a recreational development north at Crested Butte, Cement Creek, Almont, Taylor Park, Taylor River, with all those gravel trucks all the time? Look at the wear and tear that will be on our road and our bridges and our gasoline. And then I have heard by rumor, but it's very possible, I've heard it from several sources, that it is an out-of-town business. I don't know who controls it, but it is out-of-town, supervised. That the hopes are that then they would make that into an asphalt plant.
Oh, great.
Now, wouldn't that be great?
Oh, great.
Us, all our cattle, all our animals, our grasses and our trees would be covered with the greasy, gooey stuff and smell. No, thanks. I'll take horses and cow in the manure pile any day. So that's another thing. We've really got to extend our thoughts and desires.
Let me put this back on and we can talk a little about it. I'll put this on first and I'll turn this back on and talk. Okay. All right, it's back on. So, what are some of the things citizens can do to help preserve life as it's the qualities of life that make this place? Be
aware, be vigilant, be active. Instead of saying, oh, they're going to put a road up on top of Tenderfoot Mountain and haul dynamite up there and blow it all up. Oh, well, it won't bother me. I'm up by Crested Butte. This sort of thing should not go. If we want to keep it as is, we've got to be active. In order to have a future, we've got to preserve the past and take care of the present, and I don't think we're doing that.
Okay. Now, to conclude, can you tell me what one of your happiest memories is from growing up here?
Probably the finishing, when I was a child, the finishing of haying. We always had a big celebration. My mother, even though it would be early in the season, we didn't raise turkeys at all. We'd get a turkey, and she would prepare a fabulous meal our last days of before the hay crew left. And of course, my father was a big advocate, although he was a marvelous machinist. All of our power on our ranch was horse powered. We had a large group of horses, and they were wonderful things. And then all the men left except one or two, and they remained all winter with us. And that was always sort of a big celebration. And then if you had been good, you always got a reward, when the cattle were shipped or this fall.
Yeah.
And our bills were paid once a year. I mean, every rancher, you'd go and put it on my charge account. You paid your bills once a year.
Yeah.
And it was rather nice because when you paid your bill, then the grocery store would send a nice 5-pound box of candy or something,
Yeah, right.
There was always a recognition of thanks and appreciation
Yeah,
extended.
yeah, well, that's nice. When you look back, is there a particularly poignant memory or a sad memory that...
Yes, when my parents left the ranch.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, of course, that was a whole different way of life.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And did you ever go back and visit?
Not very much, because then it was sold to outside people.
Mm-hmm.
But, and then his friends, the little plants, kept their ranch quite a few years later until they were absolutely physically not able to keep it.
Yeah, I guess that's the hardest thing when you don't have someone who can take over your ranch.
That's it.
And you have to sell it.
And my brother, of course, was out of the state, and my sister was younger, and she was in college, and I was in grade school.
Right,
so
right, it wasn't a possibility.
No.
Yeah. It seems to me that, living on a ranch is not just living in a house. It's
no.
Explain to me the difference.
You're there, and you can't just sit. You have got things. You are the Lord and Master and the God of everything that exists there. Your animals, your ground, your water, your grass, everything is up to you. There's nobody else to do it. And if you yourself don't do it, you have got to delegate it to someone who is reliable. I mean, after all, the animals can't come in and open the refrigerator door and fix them a sandwich. And the horses can't put their own shoes on and off.
Right.
So you are the one that has to do things. And unless you are willing to devote, quote, practically be on call 24 hours a day, you're not going to be the person that you should be.
But it is a hard life, but obviously there must be rewards.
Oh, yes.
What are the rewards?
So you get up at 4:30 in the morning, so you can be out with the stock at 7 o'clock because their water's going to be frozen up hard. They're going to have to be fed. The rewards are seeing that beautiful meadow in the summer and the grass waving and waving the beautiful signals that it's ready to be harvested, and the horses running out in the pasture with their tails stressed upward and their ears perked up, and you wonder, do they see that fence? And they will run like 60, and the little calves, young, hopping around and cavorting and putting their tails up in the air, and the sweet smell of hay and the beautiful mountains that radiate their scent and beautiful sight. Nothing can replace it.
And they're quiet too. That's what I noticed about the country.
And particularly on a winter night, it's so crisp. I think you can hear your breath sail through the clouds, and the beautiful starlight shines down like 1,000 lamps lit, and there's nothing that takes the place of it.
And I think that's a good place to end, unless you have something you would like to add.
That's all I can say.
Okay.
I mean, as I say, we do have our space here and our way of life, and I think it's up to us to preserve it.
Well, thank you, Jean.
Certainly.